April 26, 1986, a date etched in the annals of history. On this day, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic explosion, releasing radiation across Europe. But while the world focused on the towering plume of radioactive smoke, another story was quietly unfolding, a tale of a train, its cargo, and a tragedy shrouded in silence. The explosion was an accident waiting to happen. Safety protocols ignored, warnings dismissed. The fallout was inevitable. Within hours, radiation had contaminated entire towns, forests, rivers, and fields. The animals grazing nearby were among the first victims. Their milk, their meat, poisoned. But in the chaos, decisions were made that would carry this invisible death far beyond Chernobyl's borders. Enter the train, an ordinary freight transport loaded with frozen meat. But this wasn't just any meat. It came from livestock exposed to lethal doses of radiation near Chernobyl. Somewhere along the way, this contaminated cargo was overlooked, ignored, or perhaps intentionally sent off. The train began its journey, cutting across borders, carrying its deadly secret. Imagine the lives unknowingly tied to this journey. Farmers who raised these animals, unaware their fields were poisoned. Train workers, fathers and brothers, who laughed and joked as they loaded the cargo, oblivious to the radiation seeping into their skin. And the families who would eventually buy this meat, feeding it to their children, trusting it was safe. These weren't just statistics. They were lives, dreams, and futures stolen by an unseen enemy. The first hint of trouble came at a small station. Inspectors noticed faint spikes in radiation levels. Nothing alarming, just enough to raise questions. But the train kept moving, passing through checkpoints, towns, and cities. At each stop, the radiation increased, yet no one acted swiftly enough to halt its deadly progress. When the truth finally surfaced, it was too late. Tests confirmed that the meat was heavily contaminated with radiation. Markets across Europe were in an uproar. Who was responsible? How could this happen? The answers were as murky as the origins of the train itself. Bureaucratic failures, corruption, and desperation all played their part. But what made this meat so dangerous? Radiation isn't something you can see, smell, or taste. Inside this meat were isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90, products of nuclear fallout. These isotopes latch onto living tissues, causing long-term damage, cancer, organ failure, and genetic mutations. Even the smallest exposure could be deadly over time. The train was eventually quarantined, its cargo incinerated, but the scars remained. Workers who handled the shipment fell ill, some succumbing to cancer. Families mourned lives lost to an invisible killer. And in the shadows of Chernobyl, countless similar stories faded into obscurity, hidden behind walls of secrecy. The radioactive meat train was more than just an isolated incident. It was a symbol of humanity's hubris, of the unseen consequences of our actions. It wasn't just the radiation that poisoned people. It was negligence, greed, and indifference. And as we look back at Chernobyl, we must ask ourselves, how many more stories remain buried, waiting to surface? The Chernobyl disaster and its radioactive aftermath caused a significant number of deaths, but the exact figures remain uncertain due to the long-term effects of radiation exposure. Here's an overview. Immediate deaths, 31. People died directly due to the explosion and acute radiation syndrome, ARS. Most were plant workers and firefighters who responded to the accident. Long-term deaths, radiation-related illnesses. United Nations, 2005. Estimates around 4,000 deaths from radiation-induced cancers and other illnesses in the long term. Greenpeace and other studies suggest the number could be 90,000 or more, as radiation effects spanned decades and impacted multiple generations. Deaths linked to the radioactive meat train. There is no exact record of deaths directly linked to the train carrying radioactive meat. However, consuming contaminated meat and other products led to health issues, including cancer and radiation-related diseases, across multiple regions. Thousands of indirect deaths could be attributed to long-term exposure to contaminated food. Total estimated deaths, depending on the source, The total deaths from the Chernobyl disaster, direct and indirect, are estimated between 4,000 and 90,000 plus, considering immediate casualties, illnesses, and long-term radiation effects. This is Filebox, where forgotten stories come to life. If this story moved you, share it. Let the world remember that history's greatest tragedies aren't always loud. They often travel silently, like a train in the night. Subscribe to Filebox for more stories that matter. And remember, awareness is our first line of defense.